Hillary has been lengthening her excuses as to why she lost the election. She didn't really lose the election. It was stolen from her by, I think it's up to 24 different excuses she has now. Number 24 is content farms in Macedonia. And as I said, my grandfather was a Macedonian content farmer, and we often think about, gathering on the porch and recalling the old days on the Macedonian. He never thought that the old content farmers he left behind in Macedonia would one day steal the U.S. presidential election. They are gnarled, hard-working Macedonian peasants, and the way they were able to reach out and steal the election.
But yeah, so Alexander Soros is in Ohrid, I see, right?
Yep.
Okay, he's
with his retinue.
Yes, he's just. I mean, I don't think he's ever. I'll bet he's never changed a tire. I'll bet he doesn't even know how to drive a stick shift. He just looks. He literally looks like this mousy, wimpy, the pajama boy.
Yeah, beta cuck.
Yes.
As they call them on Twitter now. Soy boy.
Soy boy. Yeah, he's just a disgusting... I mean, first of all, and, I don't want to do ad hominem attacks. Yes, I do. But his ideology, of course, is all wrong.
They did nothing but ad hominem attacks. I mean, it was ad hominem after ad hominem.
Yeah, but his ideology is all wrong. It's most Macedonians would not accept his ideology and that of his father. But anyway, let's do a podcast here.
Yep, number 48.
48, yeah.
By now?
Okay.
Yeah, time flies.
It does. All right, you ready?
Yep, sure.
Tres, dos, uno. For the professional elite, including the academics, media, think tanks, civil society, and certainly the unelected bureaucrats, it was bad enough when French President Emmanuel Macron said non to Macedonia beginning accession talks with the European Union last month. But now he has committed the unforgivable sin, stating, quote, "What we are currently experiencing is the brain death of NATO," unquote. And not just that, but on Russia, he said, quote, "We need to reopen a strategic dialogue," unquote, with Russia. All of this gave the aforementioned professional elite the vapors. They threw a collective hissy fit, got their knickers in a knot, beat their chests, and brayed at the moon, and of course, shed many liberal tears. So-called expert Florian Bieber, always one who wants to see his name in ink, tweeted that Macron's views on the Balkan are, quote, "based on ignorance, bias, and arrogance," unquote. And while the learned professor probably knows more about the Balkans than Le Président de France, Bieber is perhaps one of the most arrogant and biased, quote, experts, unquote, on the Balkans alive today. All of this has implications for Macedonia, of course, and in the meantime, Don Zaev de la Murtino is facing growing problems in Macedonia. And yet Zaev keeps insisting that, quote, "there is no alternative," unquote. But the wise and prudent leader would be planning for other alternatives just in case. But Zaev is neither wise, nor prudent, nor a leader. We'll discuss all of this and more on this episode of the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast. I'm Jason Miko, coming to you from the foot of the Catalina Mountains in Oro Valley, Arizona.
And this is Cvetin Suleimanov calling in from Skopje, République Macédoine du Nord. You did some French in school?
No, I did the Spanish.
Well.
Yo tengo dos años en secundaria escuela. Yo escribo, yo comprendo,
Ne comprends pas rien.
Bloody hell, I've already forgotten it. So yes, Mrs. Pierce was my Spanish teacher. That's one of the only teachers' names I remember. So anyway,
yep.
Yes,
Senora Pierce.
Yes. So this, we start here with this bigger picture of everybody is freaking out over Emmanuel Macron, and just 2 years ago they were all praising him when he was condemning quote unquote nationalism and saying, praising patriotism and everything else, and he was their hero, and now he is the villain. And it's amazing how quickly these unelected elite, professional self-appointed elite turn on him and everybody else. Now, all of this, of course, has implications for Macedonia. So Zaev has put his entire political capital on the line with EU membership, and of course that has failed. But beyond that, Zaev, let's be honest, he's just got some really bad luck as well, to be honest. But a lot of this is his own making. So we've got the ongoing scandals. We've got these smears that Citizen is directing against the opposition, against Lumbrov de Pamene. We have the new one this week, the chemical spill with OHIS there in Skopje. What else is going on that Zaev is facing and doing a terrible job of responding to?
Just millions of little things which are just quality of life issues, such as dogs in the streets. And I was exercising yesterday by the window, and I started hearing something like firecrackers, and I kind of think, should I step away from the window in case these are not firecrackers? Nah, relax. It's probably just some idiots using up their last year's stash. And then the morning I read in the news sites that it was actually a robbery in which the attackers, a guy who was cleaning the street, an employee of the city was sweeping the street, he sees them breaking into a store, tries to scare them off, and they shoot him in the leg, and they also fire 20 shots, 15 shots. I'm not sure how many were there, but it was a lot. It was a proper barrage and fled. And these are the kind of things that happen every day by now, and it's really. And the pollution is going to start.
Well, yeah, there's the pollution. But
ugly.
Yeah, but this random shooting that you just mentioned, and the bank robberies, the shootings, just general crime in general has really gone up over the past couple of years, I think, or at least it's certainly being reported on more. I just don't remember that when I lived there.
It's just going downhill. I mean, it's seriously going downhill.
Yeah. And now we
especially because they're not going to get arrested the way things are going.
Yeah.
They catch them, they release them.
Catch and release. Well, that's because Zaev and his government are putting everything they've got into still convincing President Emmanuel Macron that Macedonia is ready and that Macron should change his mind. I mean, think about the arrogance of that. I saw something that Zaev said the other day that he was going to convince Macron that Macedonia is ready, and he's going to convince Macron to change his mind. I mean, just think for a moment about both the ignorance and the arrogance of that statement. Emmanuel Macron is going to receive this little man from Macedonia and listen to him, and then snap his fingers, and then say, you know what? I was wrong. You're right. How could I have done this? And admit that to the world? I mean, it's ludicrous, and so it's both ignorant and arrogant of Zaev to even think this. So,
well, Macron is not even inviting Zaev over. He's going to have Pendarovsky, while Vučić today lorded over Zaev. They were both two heads higher than Zaev, both Vučić and Rama, and it really looked like everybody was joking this is 2.5 Men episode. And Vučić said, well, I'm going to Paris tomorrow. I had Macron recently in Belgrade. I'm going to ask about you two losers in the meantime, after I sort things with him about Serbia, making sure that we continue to progress toward the European Union while the two of you are left behind.
Right.
Macron did say in the Economist interview that he is open to changing his mind. He practically, because the Dutch were blocking Albania, so Macron wants to be a good guy toward Macedonia. He doesn't want to block both countries. He says, well, I was going to let Macedonia through, but then that meant decoupling it from Albania, and I didn't want to do this, and eventually it was the Netherlands who blocked Macedonia by default, because both me and the Netherlands were blocking Albania. But the reason why he said that he wanted to block, not to decouple Macedonia from Albania, is that he said the Albanians will get restless.
Ah, yes.
This is very, very ugly.
Yeah, he also said he claimed that the Bosnia-Herzegovina was a ticking time bomb, I think, as well. And which again gave the aforementioned professional self-appointed elite another chance to beat their chests and bray at the moon. And going back to, you mentioned Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić, who I saw an article who said he's not going to go on repeating, quote, like a parrot, unquote, that there is no other alternative. So, which is something that listeners of this podcast and readers of my column know for a long time. I've been just harping on. I've been repeating like a parrot the fact that Zaev is repeating like a parrot that there is no alternative, which of course is designed to just shut down debate, dismiss your opposition, and you know what? It's inherently lazy. Okay, so we have a set of facts here that Macedonia is not getting a date to open accession talks. So why don't you explore other opportunities and other things? I mean, you mentioned this the mini Schengen thing, which is kind of a consolation prize or something like that. But it's not just that. There's other things that are being talked about that are alternatives. Maybe it's not to totally replace the idea of European Union membership, but it's things that work, that the country can be aspiring to and working on that would be good for the citizens of not just Macedonia, but the region. So there are alternatives. Anyway.
Yeah, Vucic told this to Zaev, just as Zaev was repeating as a parrot that there is no alternative. We got ahead. So it was really humiliating for old Zoki here. But, it's a very nice term. It used to mean something completely different, that there is no alternative to free markets.
Sure.
Which Maggie Thatcher used to repeat
she
to
did.
the Labour in the United Kingdom, and she was correct. And to pervert this saying now in this way, it's really despicable. Just as the left is perverting the word liberal,
Yes.
and other laudable terms. And but the problem is that we could all get behind, and this was actually our plan under Gruevski when we realized we were blocked by the EU, that we find an alternative, which was very much along the lines of what Maggie Thatcher would say, would propose, or what the United Kingdom is now preparing for, is they're leaving the EU, which meant lower taxes, lower regulation, making the best possible use of our access to the European market, which we already have, and filling in, finding a niche, which is a pretty big niche actually, car manufacturing in Macedonia. And then, as our workforce graduates towards software and finance and the nicer stuff. But, if you could build like a mini Schengen on the basis of this, low taxes, low regulation, relaxed labor rules and manufacturing, it would be great, but we're obviously going to build it, especially in the Edi Rama dominated section of mini Schengen. We're going to fill it with cannabis production and migrant smuggling toward Europe. These are the businesses that are going to develop under Zaev, which Zaev himself is actually investing in drug producing. And
his family. It should be pointed out. Not just Zaev himself, but Zaev's family. It's a family criminal enterprise.
Yeah. And the benefits of a mini Schengen are minuscule because we already have very open borders. We can travel easily, no passports, no visas. We're now making a big deal out of like reducing waiting lines at the border crossing by 5 minutes, which is not that a big deal. We're going to make it easier for trucks to go through, but even now it's not that much of a hindrance. Work permits between the mini Schengen countries are going to be made easier to obtain. Again, we already have this.
Right.
It's not going to generate that much new economic growth in the region, but it's going to restrict us from one alternative, which Bulgaria was pushing, that we are fast-tracked to the EU under their tutorage and patronage. It's obviously not going to happen. This is why Boyko Borisov was so angry at the Brussels summit. This is not going to happen. And now we're falling in between Serbia and Albania dominated portions of mini Schengen ghetto. But as Serbia and Montenegro have a chance to advance to the EU, we're going to be left stuck with the Muslim majority part of the Balkans, with the Albanians and the Kosovars and the Bosnians. This is going to be such a disaster. I don't have words.
Well, yeah, but you just mentioned there in your mini rant, the alternatives to pursuing EU membership, or even perhaps parallel with pursuing EU membership. You mentioned the low taxation, the attracting FDI. You mentioned auto manufacturing, things that the former government was doing before Zaev was installed. And it just seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm open to correction, I'm a conservative, that's what we're about, we're always open to correction. But it just seems to me, Cvetin, that Zaev is put all of his chips, to use a poker term, on EU membership, not even pursuing FDI and foreign direct investment coming into Macedonia. And it just, he mentioned it early in when he took over the government, but it's all dropped by the wayside. And again, as I said, there is no alternative thing. It's just a lazy attitude. We're going to convince Macron to open up EU accession talks. Then EU accession talks are going to be opened, and then magically everything will be right, and the money will just pour in. The unicorns will fly. Pigs and unicorns will fly, and everything's just going to be peachy keen. And none of that's true. It's frustrating to see him do this. But anyway, let's kind of move on to some of these things we were talking about. Tell me about the because I saw one or two articles bringing us all back to Macedonia and what's going on, what Zaev is faced with, other than dealing with the French president. The OHIS spill, which we talked about earlier. So OHIS is an old communist era chemicals factory on kind of the edge of Skopje, beyond Kislovoda. But it's been closed for a long time, right?
Yeah, it went bankrupt. They couldn't keep up with the market forces. The management kept plundering the factory like the communist era management did in all other similar factories. They wanted to buy it for themselves, but they didn't have the capital or the technology to turn it around or make it worthwhile under an open market system, and it just went bankrupt. The manager was arrested after a while, but
I remember that. What was his name?
What good is it? Yorgo Čuka.
Yes, I do remember
And
him.
thousands of people were fired, and they still protest sometimes, demanding some back pay. I think some are still receiving some kind of government assistance, but it's like many other similar industrial plants around Skopje. And it's not that far from the center anymore, because the city grew, and especially this part of Aerodrome close to it grew exponentially. And this is like very close to the large Jevair buildings, which are, 40 stories buildings.
Oh yeah, well, it's near. I've got friends in Pintia. That's right near Pintia, I believe.
Yeah.
So there was a chemical spill. People naturally, justifiably worried about that. The government says, "Nah, nothing to see here. Move along." Have they got it cleaned up?
Yeah, these are like large rusting tanks which hold chemicals, which OHIS used to produce detergents and acrylic fibers and other stuff they would produce there back in the day. And as the company stopped operating, but it had reserves of chemicals for a while to carry it further. And these were left, and the tanks are rusting, and it's seeping into the ground. There is some chemical called lindan, which has apparently penetrated deep into the ground, and it would take like forever to remove the soil, and then maybe there were some plans to plant something on top of this that would make it like some plants which clean up the ground. Some were proposing turning it into a cemetery. Others would say like the only way to turn it around financially would be to give somebody to build proper real estate there, like residential buildings, and people would lap it up. I mean, trust me, Linden Chemicals be damned. Only companies which would have the funding to remove the tanks, maybe just do some surface level cleanup and of the soil and say, okay, we fixed it, and then build on top of it would be the construction companies. This is like quite a big property in a desirable part of the city, but nothing has been done, and just some small scale siphoning off of the chemicals. And apparently this was meant for Switzerland. I don't know what they're doing with this, probably chemical, a poison gas or something. This is so old chemical. I don't think it's usable anymore for whatever its purpose was back in the day. Something called methyl acrylate or something like acrylate or something, and I suppose it was used to make fibers.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's more poisonous with the passage of time are less poisonous, but it smells horribly. It is toxic. And, people were freaked out.
Wow. Well, so you've got that. People, again, are justifiably worried, and their safety should come first. It should be the first priority of the government, both the city government as well as the national government. Let's switch tack slightly to over to the special prosecutor. So what's going on? So I understand that the former special prosecutor's office can't pay their electric bill. Is that correct?
Yeah, the poor darlings. And Zaev insists that the letters Katica Janeva sent from prison, where she's supposed to be stripped of all her authority on the count of being detained for abusing her office financially and politically. She sent letters giving her cases to the OHIS Service of Prosecutors, the much larger office where her SPO office was extracted from. But so everybody on the government side insists that these letters are legitimate because this allows Zaev to continue arresting Vimera people and prosecuting them, Gruevski and the people around him, based on the charges Katica Janeva initiated, which are now managed by the OHIS office, which is again very loyal to Zaev. But other documents, other orders which she might give, or a deputy appointed by default or anything, everybody says none of this is applicable. Only this order which we really want, which is to continue trying the cases, and all other day-to-day orders like paying the salaries, paying the bills, etc. This is considered not valid. And they're now, these people who were extorting millions from businessmen, they would charge, and who would flash around with Louis Vuitton bags and who would be seen buying real estate across the country, etc. They're now complaining that the poor darlings, they don't have money. There was some stupidly emotional comment today, by an anonymous prosecutor. I signed up here for justice and rule of law, and I'm going to stay working for the special prosecutor's office, even if I'm the last person in the office and the lights is shut and there is no heating. I'm going to keep coming for no salary.
Yeah, right.
Get out of here. This is so pathetic. Such losers.
How do you really feel? Okay, but where are we now with they're going to go to trial now, right? Katica and Boki and Zoran Milevsky are going to be put on trial. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's a procedure where the court needs to accept whether the charges are worthy, good enough to proceed to a full trial. This stage passed. Obviously, Katica, her lawyers, Irina Frčkovska, the wife of this despicable former interior minister, who was king during this time when all of these companies like OHIS were being destroyed, and the police, the prosecutors were supposed to investigate the plundering of the communist era companies, and they did nothing. They would just divide the spoils between the government ministers.
All related.
And now his latest wife, is defending Katica Janeva, and they filed, they obviously demanded that the charges are dropped, but the court decided that we're going ahead, and now they're supposed to assign a judge to Katica Janeva electronically, which is the usually abused way of, it's supposed to be like random number generator, but it always happens to be like all the cases against Vimera were assigned to Dobrila Kacarska, the judge, who could be counted on to give the most strict verdict, and whatever Zaev wants at the time, Zaev will get.
Right.
So now we're waiting to have a judge appointed to Katica Janeva's case.
Okay, and I assume also for Boki 13 and Milevsky as well. Okay, so anyway, let's just, regardless of who the judge is, so you've got that, then you actually have to go to trial. And how long could a trial take? I mean, this thing, my point being that this thing is going to be dragged out into next year during the elections, or as we're getting closer to the elections. And that just doesn't, to me, it doesn't seem like that's something that Zaev wants, out in the press every day and the public thinking about as they sit down at their to read the morning newspaper or listen to the news and have their coffee. To have this constantly in their face that the crown jewel of Zaev and his government and the Western progressive elites that put him in power, the crown jewel on trial. during an election campaign.
Yeah.
It just doesn't seem like they would want that.
Yeah, Zaev's in a pickle. He would like to postpone this for after the elections, but Katisyana, who is cooperating now with Zaev, giving these orders to give the cases to the OHIS prosecutors, she's obviously coordinating with Zaev, and she would like this wrapped up as soon as possible before the government is replaced. But I don't know if she has much to haggle with, except, just going full, giving like a full testimony what Zaev knew and when he knew it, which would be very dangerous for her, her family, etc. But this is the only thing she can haggle with, she can bargain with. She would like this wrapped up as soon as possible with this level of charges, not expanded, not broadened into other people. There is a separate case which involves Frosina Remensky, a top SDSM official, but this is for a different line of racketeering which Boki 14 was engaged with. So this could be postponed, while Katica's case, it's very likely that she will want this done as soon as possible and, just get like a few years and then maybe quickly commute it into a suspended sentence. Well, yeah, you're right. Zaev would definitely want to have this postponed.
Right. And then you've got Racket 2. And I see that the journalist Branko Geroski published or announced or published some more details. This is the racket, the scandal, I should say, involving the health insurance fund director Dan Donchev and the health minister Venko Filipche, the Swedish firm, and the Macedonian dialysis firm Diadem, I believe is the name of it.
Yep.
And so that is still ongoing as well. And what is the latest on that in terms of legal issues?
This is a private charge from the owner of Diadem, who is accusing Donchev and Filipchev of extorting money from her. And, this clearly goes to Zaev as well, just like the other Katisyana racket case. And the court has still not decided, or actually the prosecutors at this point need to decide whether they're going to accept the privately filed charges from, but they still haven't decided. But then obviously Vomera is hinting that they have evidence. Laris Geiser is hinting that he has evidence, apparently recordings, which will surface if the prosecutors don't do their thing and don't pick up the case. And this is obviously, the timing of this completely depends on the opposition and on Geiser and obviously the Diadem people who were apparently very likely recording these extortion attempts and are probably sharing this with Geiser or other people. And if, there's many ways to make the material public, and this would be up to them to choose the timing, and hopefully they choose wisely and time it well before the election.
Right. Yeah. Well, so it's still another one of these things that's hanging over Zaev's head and hanging over his government's head, and it doesn't sound like it is going anywhere fast.
No. And Katisyana is negotiating apparently with people. There was a picture circulating of her speaking on Viber or this camera with somebody, whether from prison where she has apparently computer privileges but yeah, she's working her angles and she's trying to to cut deals. I mean, if she was smart, if Boki was smart, they would try to make deals with the incoming government, not with Zaev, but we'll see.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the incoming government, assuming that it's not going to be Citizen, again, we have elections coming up in April 12, per the Przino agreement. Zaev has to step down, I guess, January 3rd. New prime minister from Citizen. Vomero Dopomene gets a couple of positions, including interior minister and I think health and welfare or something like that.
Labor and
welfare. Okay, yeah. And then, so here we are. We're coming up this middle of November next week. Oh, I should say we are recording this. This is episode number 48. We're recording this on Sunday, November 10. This will drop tomorrow, Monday, November 11. Just to kind of put a date stamp on this so folks know what we're talking about, where we're going. Anyway, with a month from now, both on both sides of the pond, y'all are going to be thinking of Christmas and New Year's, and we're going to be thinking of Christmas and New Year's, and then all of a sudden January comes. January 3rd, as I just mentioned, this change in government. Orthodox Christmas is January 7. They got Old New Year's, etc. So there's a lot going on. A lot of people aren't going to be really focused on the politics and whatnot. They are rightly going to be celebrating the holidays with the families and friends. And then, in the meantime, while all this is going on, now there's talk about a new electoral model that Zaev seems to be gung-ho moving towards making Macedonia one electoral unit. His partners in government, Dewey, are against that. What can you tell our listeners about that?
Well, first of all, there is a lot of chatter from Zaev people, Spasovsky most recently, that they want to escape from the elections using this necessity to ratify the NATO protocol.
Oh, yes, there's that.
As soon as it's ratified by Spain. So they're still talking about this, and it might happen. So this is one of their exit strategies: try to postpone the elections until October, and hope that Macron, muddles something up by then, and that people forget about the crime and racketeering. And if not, their other option is to amend the electoral laws, which is never done without the approval of all major parties. Amending the model, the way which members of parliament are elected. It was always agreed consensually, and if everybody can't agree, every big party can't agree, you just don't do it. But now Zaev is saying that he's going to do this unilaterally, which is a huge break of trust and precedent. This would mean we currently have 6 districts. Each of them elects 20 members of parliament through a proportionate model, which means that the small parties, if you have a geographically concentrated small party, you do fine. And Albanian parties do fine because they're concentrated in one district, and then in several others they can count on a few members of parliament extra. But then, I don't know, the Serbian party or the Bosniak party can't win one member, so they have to go with either VMRO or SDSM in coalition to make their votes count. If we have one unit, basically if you win a bunch of votes all across the country, you have a chance of winning one member of parliament. This would apply to renegade, these fake VMRO parties which Zaev is supporting, like Ljubčo's or Ljubes or Stojan Changelov's party. This would do well for Levica, the far left group, which could not win a seat on its own, but might win one or two if we have a large one electoral district. And VMRO, SDSM, and the Albanian parties and DUI would lose 1 or 2 seats in parliament, but then we would get a few smaller parties in. And this would mean that, Zaev is counting that he can use the prosecutors, the police, the budget, the instruments of power to keep these smaller parties in check, that they would join a coalition with him. And meanwhile, he would deprive VMRO of several seats in parliament, while he would lose several himself, but then he would hold on to, I don't know, the Roma party, Amdi Bayram, or the Serbian party, these guys who usually flip sides when the government changes. Sure. He hopes that he would be able to hold on to them after the election.
Now, the important question is, what does it take to change the electoral model in terms of legislation? Is it just a simple majority vote, or is it a 2/3 vote, or what?
Yeah, it's 61 votes. I think a majority of Albanians is necessary too.
Right.
But it's never been done in this way before. It's it's another sign that Zaev is going to play dirty. If we needed any more convincing and and anything else to tell us that.
Yeah, you mentioned at the beginning of that the issue of Zaev trying to perhaps postpone elections because Parliament needs to be seated when the NATO ratification comes up, and we're still waiting for Spain. I should also mention that today, again, Sunday, November 10, so the Spanish are having elections today. So the reason that they have not ratified the NATO accords for Macedonia is because they haven't had a government. I'm looking at a BBC. You think you got it bad in Macedonia? I'm looking at a BBC article right here. It says, quote, Spain has not had a stable government since 2015. So they're having...
Well, same here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, well, actually, I mean, frankly, look at Israel. Israel looks like they're going to have a third election within the year coming up soon as well. But anyway, so the Spanish are having elections today. Then they've got to form the government, and that's a bit messy and whatnot. Once they finally form the government, then they would vote whatever their procedure is internally to accept Macedonia as a NATO member. None of that's going to happen before, I think it's December 4. Is that when the NATO meeting in London is?
Yeah,
NATO London.
Something like that.
Yeah. So, but anyway, so Macedonia is not going to be Macedonia is not going to be an official member of NATO by December 4. It's going to be next year sometime. Let's see, yes, December 3 and 4. So, celebrating NATO's 70th anniversary. I'm going off on a quick tangent here, but I've got this number of 70 stuck in my head for some reason. The Soviet Union didn't quite make it to 70 years. It fell apart at 69. The People's Republic of China just celebrated 70 years. NATO is celebrating 70 years. The European Union, depending on when you count its formation, whether it's the Treaty of Paris, Treaty of Rome, the Schuman, I forgot the word, Schuman. Anyway, it's coming up on 70 years, and there's something about 70 that could be good or bad for you. Anyway.
Well, NATO has gone brain dead by 70, if you trust Macron.
Yes, going back to what Macron said earlier, brain dead. Did he actually say brain dead or brain? What was his quote? Let me go back and look at this. The brain death of NATO. That's what he said.
Yep.
Brain Dead is an excellent sitcom on Amazon Prime, but involving Washington D.C. politics. Oh, excellent.
Okay.
All right. Anyway, so that's the elections coming up. Obviously, we will be treated to nonstop news about those elections and the back and forth and what's going on. What else we got?
On the elections, I mean, we will still have a functional parliament well into February, so
right.
There is plenty of time for the Spanish to ratify this and the few remaining holdouts. But yeah, Zaev is obviously mentioning this to postpone the elections. What else have we got? We have. I mean, there are shoes dropping on the colored revolution every day, like one worse than the other. The latest was that. I'm not sure if we discussed this here. The policeman who killed Martin Nishkovsky, this huge case in 2011, a brutal police officer beating to death a 20-year-old kid during a celebration of Vimera election victory. But he was a Vimera supporter. He was, probably too eager to get closer. And then the policeman kills him, beats him to death, and people were horrified. Who saw this and. The policeman then tried to escape, to avoid blame by not reporting this, playing dumb, and there were some people coming into town. I think we were playing Scotland, and there was some carnival, the Baskerfest organized by the guys from from the winery. So there was a whole bunch of strangers in town. The murder was not reported. The family did not report the murder. So the police was not sure they have a body, but they're not sure who to trust. And only takes a few days to identify the child and the kid, and then the policeman is pressured and he acknowledges what happened. SDSM starts protesting this, and then in 2015, 4 years later, they use this in the colored revolution because they edit out the parts in which it's clear that Gruevski, the interior minister, Gordon and Kulovsky at the time are concerned about the murder and are making sure that the policeman Igor Spasov is not allowed to escape to cover up the case, but that in fact he would be tried in full. This is very clear from the full recording, 12 minutes tape which was aired in full only this year, only recently, months ago. But Zaev edited a few portions of the tape and they made them look like Gruevski and Yankulovsky are trying to cover up the murder. They would paint the Skopje town square where the celebration took place and the murder was carried out in red, in blood. They would go after government officials shouting at them, killers, murderers. This was the most violent protest where they would pelt the police with stones and try to break into the government building. And now the policeman, in the meantime, hired a lawyer who also defended Zoran Zaev, and who now works with Zaev in his marijuana business. And then Zaev meets him in prison during a visit to Idrizovo, because the policeman was sentenced under VMRO to 14 years in prison. It was not, it was probably the highest penalty you could get in Europe. And Zaev meets him cordially in prison. Shortly after, the policeman's cousin gives him a medical bill, which he uses to claim and actually receive a medical leave from prison, lasting a full year. The murderer, who SDSM built their colored revolution on getting him in prison and shouting "No justice, no peace," is left is left out of prison on a bogus medical,
charge or
medical
excuse.
What? Yeah, on a bogus medical excuse for a full year, during which he plans his escape. He's supposed to return to prison, like in October, and he's nowhere to be found. Apparently, some say he fled to the Netherlands, others say he fled to Turkey. And the brother of the boy who was killed, who was participating in each and every single protest of VMRO against VMRO, falsely claiming that, little did he know. Sure. Obviously, he was going after he was manipulated by Zaev, claiming that his brother was killed as part of an elaborate cover-up from going to the highest reaches of the VMRO government. And his brother is now interviewed, and he says, "Well, I'd rather not talk about this. I have a family." So under Zaev, now that we have justice and we should have peace, the murderer flees the country, and the brother of the killed boy is scared to even say something about this on the air. This is where we've gotten. This is what it's come to.
So nobody knows where this guy escaped to. There's rumors.
Something in the Netherlands.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
they gave him a year to plan the escape.
Yeah.
He could be anywhere by now.
Man. Well, I sure hope they find him. I hope they bring him back, and I hope they lock him up and throw the key away. See, this is the problem. This is one of the problems with you. I think one of the problems with you Europeans, Cvetin, is that you don't have the death penalty. The death penalty is good, and it's a deterrent. Anyway.
And gun ownership, just try attack, beat somebody to death. You have to presume he has a pistol. He has something on himself. And welcome back to the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast. This is Cvetin Shilimanov with Jason Miko on the line from Tucson, Arizona. And we've discussed everything that is wrong with Macedonia. Now maybe a few things that have somehow gone right. It's time for the farmers' picks, and Jason, maybe you start.
Yeah, sure. I found this great article from SBS, which is the Australian language service for the many languages that the Australians speak, radio, TV, digital. And it's an article from early November here by Maggie Yankolowska, and she says, "I wish I wasn't so quick to shed my native tongue." So she says, "As a 10-year-old, I wanted to belong, to quickly assimilate, and to shed the dreaded title of, quote, the kid who can't speak English." So she came to Australia when she was 10 in the summer of 1998, and she quickly learned the English language with all of the rich influences of the Aussie form of the English language. But she was forgetting her own Macedonian, and she regrets that. And this is actually a good news story because she says at the end of the article, she has a young son. She says, "Having my son, it feels like I'm getting it back for him, the language." She writes, "He also has an innate way to draw it out of me. I comfort and sing to him in Macedonian." So it's a nice story that it's a warning and a lesson to Macedonians, especially those that leave Macedonia and go abroad, to never lose that language and to always remember it and teach it to your children and to use it in the culture, the rich culture of Macedonia, in song and poetry and literature and dance and all that. So I like that. It's a nice little again, a little bit of a warning, but it's a good news story coming out of the Macedonian community in Australia. So that's my farmer's pick. Cvetin, what is your farmer's pick?
Yeah, it's also similar. Macedonian guy does a good story, this time courtesy of Reuters. I haven't known about this guy before. Svetozar Bogdanovski from Veles. He is cited in Reuters as a maker of violins, which apparently fetch a good price, like 60,000 euros a piece. He apparently started doing these copies of Italian masters.
Stradivarius.
When some guy named Guarnerius is mentioned here. I'm not really much of an expert here. His son wanted to pick up the violin, and Svetozar built him one 35 years ago, Reuters says, and since he hasn't stopped, and he's now making them from woods sourced from Bosnia, from spruce and maple wood, which has to be dried and then soaked for years before he can start working on this. There's a nice video to go with the process and with the report which Reuters did. And apparently Kostadin, his son, is now a notable violinist, as is his wife, who teaches the violin. And since in the 45 years since Svetozar Bogdanovski has built more than 700 such instruments.
Wow.
Many of them copies of Italian masters.
Wow, and of course they're highly
nice
and they're highly prized by violin players and collectors and orchestras around the world. Actually, the violin, Cvetin, you probably don't know this. So that the one instrument I was tried to learn and did play for a while was the violin when I was a kid. So it's just such a beautiful, sweet sound. I actually thought about taking it up again, but I'm not sure I can afford 60,000 euros for a new violin.
Yeah, maybe start with some Chinese copy at first.
Well, that is great. That's a good news story coming out of the town of Veles in Macedonia. So Veles isn't known only for Macedonian content farmers. It's known for...
Yeah, just you wait. You're having elections soon, right?
Yes.
Which reminds me.
So, well, that's good. Two good news stories in this podcast. Always good talking to you, Cvetin.
Yeah, you too, buddy. Until next week.
Oh.